Hey, it's Mazzy here, and this is another in a series from the Acid Archives. This great book with a lot of indie psychedelic contributions, not all psychedelic, from freak folk, independent, avant-garde out there. Mostly small press labels, but there are some majors in here as well. And the link below is to the full playlist on the Seeking a Thread channel, but with all the other contributors around YouTube and the vinyl community who have made videos on one album from this. And I picked another album. This is my fourth, I believe, from this wonderful, wonderful book. This is the second pressing, the book. You can still get this book at your bookstore or online for about $45. I'm going to stick with San Francisco because I think 3 out of the 4 of the bands and records I have showcased are from San Francisco. This is The Great Society featuring Grace Slick. You can see how Columbia Records really pushed her on this record. Now, the Grace Slick, obviously most people know her from the Jefferson Airplane, later Jefferson Starship, a couple of solo albums. But this is, to me, a really important album in psychedelic music, and actually it takes some excursions into jazz, drone, raga as well. Grace the Slick were formed in 1965. They only lasted 2 years, 65, 66. And that was about it. Into early 67, I guess, when Grace Slick was invited to join the Jefferson Airplane. After their first album with Signe Anderson, their singer, she became pregnant. They were more of a folk rock group than the Jefferson Airplane, doing Tobacco Road, during the song Get Together. Love Is What a Song We Sing, of course. Some wonderful things. The first band recorded and signed to RCA Records, the first of the sounds of San Francisco, prior to the Summer of Love. That is a fantastic album. Sidney Lees and the Jefferson Airplane invite Grace Slick to become a member. Here is one of my handbills from a show at the Fillmore Auditorium, and it shows the Jefferson Airplane headlining and the Great Society opening up. They opened up frequently for the Airplane, and of course, the bands knew each other. The Great Society was with Jerry Slick, who was then the husband of Grace Slick. That was her married name, Slick. Her brother-in-law, Darby Slick, was on the guitar and wrote the song Somebody to Love. When she left Great Society, she took those great songs, but the Jefferson Airplane actually made them something completely different with White Rabbit and Somebody to Love. But let's concentrate on this. Unfortunately, the Great Society never recorded and released a proper studio album. They were signed to Columbia Records. Columbia, picks them up because of what was happening with the Jefferson Airplane and getting some San Francisco bands. And of course, Grace quits Great Society, goes to the Airplane, and Columbia basically nulls her contract. Somewhat later, Grace and Jerry Slick get divorced, but that's more of a personal thing. I wonder if it's contributed to that. But this is a record that was released in 1968 on Columbia Records. Now, this is a twofer that came out in the 70s. Columbia sort of used these tapes to really, make some money off the success of Jefferson Airplane's Realistic Pillow in 1967. One of the great records of that year in 1967 of the San Francisco sound, the really big breakout of the San Francisco bands. And of course, since they had, somewhat of a contract, they were able to release these tapes, recorded in 1966 at the Matrix. And the Matrix was a small club bar down in Cow Hollow area, San Francisco, on Fillmore Street, right below Union Street. It was co-owned for some years by Marty Ballin, who was one of the founding members also of the Jefferson Airplane. And there's some great live recordings that have come out. It looks like they did board tapes. I don't know if they did all the shows, but over the last, decade or 15 years, there's been live recordings in 1967 of The Doors, in 1968 or 9 of the Velvet Underground that came out live at the Matrix, and they're good sounding records. This is a later version of the two individual records that Columbia issued in 68 and 69, I believe, with green cover, different color variations of this cover. This is the twofer that has all of it. Now, there's some tape hiss on these recordings, but these are excellent recordings. Now, the Great Society itself had a really interesting sound. They were kind of like one of the, you know, influence. Think of on the East Coast, better musicians, but the Paul Butterfield Blues Band with East West that has that raga sound, that drone sound. Of course, when you have Mike Bloomfield and you have Elvin Bishop, you're going to have better guitar players that you're going to have with Darby Slick here. But this is a rough recording in terms of musically, but it's a really interesting recording because they go on these long, long jams of Eastern melodies. In fact, they have saxophone and flute on here, not on a lot of the tracks, but the bass player doubled up on the woodwinds. And you have that reminiscent of Eastern sounds, of like a Yusef Lateef Eastern sounds. So you have a little bit of the jazz out there stuff happening. And, you know, I remember when I first got this and got these tapes, I realized it was a little maybe subpar recording, but it's way better than any bootleg or something. It's a good sounding record. You do have the tape hiss, but it's a good sounding recording. Grace belts it. I've always loved her, almost like these tones she gets, and this she belts it. She screams it in some ways, but she holds the notes, and she can hold the notes for a long time. If you've heard live Airplane tracks, if you've heard her solo record, her first solo record called Manhole, you'll know that she gets in these kind of Eastern flavors of tones, of melodies, of chord, I guess, structures, melody structures. And it's really beautiful if you like that style. I just adore her voice on here. Now, on here is a versions of Somebody to Love and a version of White Rabbit. The White Rabbit literally goes on to something like a 6, 7, 8 minute intro Eastern jam type thing. It's right out of any kind of maybe free jazz or a spiritual jazz type sound. Not as wonderfully played, but it has that almost a little looseness to it, and not great guitar playing per se, obviously. You have this long intro, and then she sings White Rabbit. And if you know, obviously, most of you know the final version has that beautiful, like, Yorma Kakkonen intro that's very Middle Eastern. It's very kind of raga-like. This is like 8 times that, but not as tight as or as well played as Yorma plays with the Airplane version. There's some saxophone on here, as I said, and flute that has this jazzy, a jammy feel to it, and it's really a wonderful sound. There is a song on here they do. This might even be the first time I recall hearing it. Sally Go Round the Roses. I think it was the Janettes, a pop kind of, you know, girl group that recorded that in 1963, and this became sort of a staple with a lot of these bluesy psychedelic bands of the late 1960s, mid 60s to late 60s. Sally Round the Roses was a wonderful song that a lot of these bands covered and would play live. What's interesting about this version, there's 2 sets of liner notes. One, it's really not about the record, and it's by Rex Reed, and it's really coming from Rex Reed, a New Yorker film critic, writing up this profile. I don't know what magazine he was writing for, but the opening paragraph is, "I was wondering what an all-American girl next door is doing in a place like this," and talks about a few blocks from San Francisco's poorest low-rent district, meaning the Haight in the Western Addition. And the description of this is probably by the time the Jefferson Airplane owned 2400 Fulton Street, their mansion, right adjacent to the Haight, corner of Haight, 3 blocks from where I was born, literally the hospital, and across from Golden Gate Park. And yeah, it was a little bit of a funky area then, but he doesn't really write about the music. I don't think that wasn't a profile of the Great Society. It was a profile on Grace Slick, because she was the former model. I think she was 28 or 29 within the Airplane, so she was like the eldest of the groups at the time, just about to turn 30. She was a walkway model that worked in the department stores in San Francisco, I. Magnums and Macy's, those kind of things, you know, just standing there, fashioning for rich women, buying these clothes and presenting it to them. But she became this rock star and very political person, her persona, her writing, her everything out of her mouth at the time, aside from her singing, was very left-wing politics, and I really admire her in so many ways. But I do want to take a little detour. All the songs on here are great. This belting of Slick, you know, the musicianship is not primo at all, but there's something really wonderful about the looseness of this record. Now, if you like this music and you like this thing, I have to showcase this. This is where I'm going on a tangent. The two records by The Third Mind. This is basically this style of music and these songs from everybody from the Great Society, from the Jefferson Airplane, the Grateful Dead, brought into better musicianship and modern day recordings. Dave Alvin, the great guitar player, played with X for a while, but original member, him and his brother of the Blasters. He's a great kind of a rockabilly, bluesy, psychedelic thing. And this is exactly what these two Third Mind records. And in fact, on the second one, you got Jesse Sykes, a vocalist that has a little bit of the Grace Slick vibe. I don't like her voice as much. It's very folky, psychedelic, bluesy cross. And they do a version on here, a wonderful version of Sally Go Around the Roses. Groovin' is Easy, the Electric Flag song, which is fantastic. You need to see them live. They're going to be coming around, I think, later in the year again. I saw them live last time, and they're fantastic. The first Third Mind record that came out literally just as the pandemic was hitting has a version of Dolphins, that great Fred Neil song, and Morning Dew, of course, a song that so many bands did, including the Grateful Dead, and of course, the aforementioned East West from the Paul Butterfield. So the psychedelic raga thing was really happening, and really happening strong here with this band, even more so than the Airplane or any of the bands had this sound. And I think with some practice, maybe, and maybe a little more kick in the rhythm section, they could have been a good band. But of course, once Grace left, the magic was over. I do want to do a shout out on the photographer here, because this cover image is taken by Herb Green, who was around San Francisco around this time. He took the cover of Surrealistic Pillow. In fact, you can see this backdrop. A lot of people thought it was a Matrix. This was basically his apartment in North Beach, the photographer's apartment. I have a picture here, which I'm going to insert, that Herb Green gave me years ago when I had my photo agency in San Francisco, and it's a picture of Grace Slick in front of the same background. What a great photograph, taken at the same session as Surrealistic Pillow. Not this with the Great Society, but he used that backdrop with several of the bands that he photographed. But this is the double album, combines the two. So let's see what the Acid Archives has to say about this record. Listening to Great Society's classic Matrix June 66 tapes, the source for all these releases, it's striking how promising the band was and how close they were to crystallizing what would later be called the San Francisco sound. That's totally spot on. The musical orientation was in place, and the songwriting was there too, along with the charismatic front figure, basically Grace Slick. What a lead to any band, right? The only thing the band lacked was a bit more emphasis on guitar-driven rock and a solid Freeburg-Elmore type rhythm section. That's in reference to the rhythm section of Quicksilver Messengers at the time that had really a tight rhythm section. Same with Moby Grape at that time. But greatness was not to come, with the band's main musical engines leaving to study music in India. Well, that's right, one of the Slick brothers went to India, and the other guys apparently not really devoted to a career in rock. Jefferson Airplane made romantic overtures to Grace, and the rest, you know, is history. So they reach out to Grace. One of the Slicks goes to India. I mean, there is that Indian, Middle Eastern, also Middle Eastern sound in this music. The set of 17 tracks, first released on 2 Airplane cash-in releases from CBS, is loaded with strong original material. It's odd that Grace Slick never revisited these marvelous songs. Snaky late-night rocka leads from Peter Vandergelder. Now, he was the bass player, so he wasn't the guitar player, so I don't know why they mentioned him. He was the bass player who also played sax and flute on the album, so he wouldn't have done, I guess unless we're referring to his sax playing, that he adds a near magical atmosphere. It's a little defensive, but not more than any other San Francisco band at the time. Only a few jazzy sax excursions break the spell. More live tapes exist, as well as a substantial 65 studio session, which has been released on Born to be Burned on CD Sundays in 1995, with their classic local 45 added. I do not have that. So, a great album in terms of musically, historically. I think musically it's really wonderful, but it is raw in terms of the playing. Like the lead guitar player of Darby Slick is a little stunted, it doesn't flow like Dave Alvin on those Third Mind albums, or even, obviously Elvin Bishop and the wonderful playing of Mike Bloomfield on the albums on the East Coast from Paul Butterfield Blues Band. But this is worth checking out again. 2 individual versions are available, plus this later 2 for combining both records. Grace Slick and the Great Society. Of course, the cash in, cash grab, as they say. Thank you. Mazzy loves you.